Now I'm going to continue my work on the room. This is the second tape, trying to make sense of that video I made called The Room, where I took a painting by Chagall called The Birthday and did some Gestalt dream work on it as though I dreamed it. And I hope you look at the first video. I covered there a little bit of Plato, a little bit of Schopenhauer, a little bit of essay number 51 of Nachman of breslav. Here my focus is going to be on what's left, which is 52. Also in that previous one I mentioned Dylan Thomas' poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. Okay, so now a lot of here, what I say here is going to be repeating what I said already in the video, another video I made about the same essay, likutei moharan, number 52. Likutei moharan means collected essays. Collected essays of Nachman of breslav, number 52 in part 1. Okay, so please look at that video to get all the details. I'm going to assume that you looked at that. I can't. It doesn't make sense to just repeat everything every single time. It gets to be boring for me, and not to mention for anyone else. Okay, so here we go. The focus here is on relating this thing specifically to the room. And here I have an essay that I wrote, where I wove the comments about the room into the overall essay. Oh, right, I forgot to bring myself a... Excuse me, this is what I was regretting that I didn't have when I made the last essay. All right, the last video. Go. So he begins here. יש אפיקורסים שאומרים שהעולם הוא מחויב המציאות. There are materialistic pleasure seekers in the world that believe that the world is the way it is the way it's got to be. Mechuyav ha'metziut, obligated. And in the other essay I talked in the video about likutei moharan 52, I mentioned that means finding. We got to translate it literally. Instead of necessary existence, we should translate it as obligated finding. That when we what we find when we contact reality. So depending on how we contact reality, if we're not into awareness, if we block out most of our reality by focusing on our intellectual systems or our ways that we want to manipulate people, or whatever it is, then we have a distorted idea of, according to Nachman of breslav, of obligatory finding, what we find, matzah, to find in Hebrew. So now how does that tie in with the show? I start the show, like I said, it has the form of dialectical structure, and I mentioned that in the previous video about this show. It starts off with a abstract idea of a room, everyday room, furniture, inside, outside, light, darkness, basic things. And then, like I said, by working on awareness, the room gradually dissolves into all its other elements. Shifts over to the world of awareness, what we call inductive logic, from the world of deductive logic, from cause and effect thinking to awareness type thinking. So that's what I did in the beginning of the show. We have the character, the narrator, is talking about a room, and he's saying that there's a door, there's a window, and he sees outside a village, and he sees the furniture or whatever, and the two people. So it starts off in a deductive cause and effect Epicurus way, what Nachman call an Epicurus, a materialist, a pleasure seeker kind of mentality. And then gradually the thing shifts over to the other kind of thinking, awareness-based thinking. As I become aware of one thing after the other and identify with different objects. So here's how nachman of breslav says that. Ki be'emet ha'olam u'mla'o hu efshari ha'metziut. Because really, the world is efshari ha'metziut, chance, by accident, possible finding. And that, as I already pointed out in the video about likutei moharan 52, that refers to awareness. And I mentioned at that time, just repeat for a second, that the root of the word possible in Hebrew, efshar, the old root from a few hundred years ago, means to divide. So in that sense, moving from a systematic idea, a system, is a room that's locked into our grid and our matrix of thinking of how rooms are supposed to be in real life, to moving out of that into a freer kind of idea of all these different moments, separate moments, objects. Each one is a world in itself with its own little language of possible expression, and so that's mitpasher, the world of that picture, mitpasher. It spreads out. It spreads out. It's divided, fragmented up to a whole bunch of separate little worlds. Worlds within worlds within worlds. Instead of being simply one big system. So that, in that sense, Nachman is right, except he doesn't tell us that he's shifting his philosophical context from cause and effect thinking, deductive logic, to inductive logic. Divided, scattered awarenesses rather than a big system. So, and he's saying that he himself prefers the scattered way of looking at reality based on awareness, and the people who don't agree with that, they're not my part. They're not in my club. They're not. They're epicursim. They're materialists. They don't live by the faith. They're not part of the community. They're materialists. They're sitra achra, the other side of the bad guys. All right. Because only God Himself, He is the necessary finding. But now he's speaking from the point of view of this fragmented world based on awareness, and that's true. It is true that when you start with a bunch of million awarenesses and you just stay with a meditative process of awareness, there's a natural river that starts flowing, and they come together into the small gestalts become bigger gestalts, and everything is encompassed, and lower order angels are kind of encompassed in higher order angels until you get to the cherubim. This phenomenology of the spirit is a natural process that happens. I'm telling you, again I repeat, I'm basing it not on what I read in the book. I'm talking about 37 years of working with about 630 people where I see it happens. And my BA is in chemistry. So I wouldn't be doing this for 37 years if it was just because somebody said it's true. My experience is that this stuff does happen. There is a river of phenomenological reality, of awarenesses that does have the tendency to congeal into peak experiences if you take the process seriously and avoid what Nachman is going to call the moni'im. That's a key word, moni'im. Something obstructs, monea. In fact, let me get to that crucial sentence right now. At the end of the piece here, he says, Ach, no, not ach, da she'ikar habitul, she'adam mevatel yeshuto, v'naseh ayin, v'nichlal ba'achdut Hashem yitbarach, ein ze ela al yedei hitbudadut, v'hitbudadut tzarich makom uzman מיוחד, שלא יבלבלו אותו המונעים. Now in this piece he doesn't make much of a big deal about the moni'im, the obstructions. But I refer you first of all to that video I made called Hitbodadut, where it's about an hour and a half long, and the first half an hour I took every one of these moni'im one after the other, the Gestalt self-interruptions they're called, and I showed exactly how they interfere with awareness. I'm talking about confluence, introjection, projection, retroflexion, and egotism, according to Gestalt therapy theory. And my reference here is Gestalt therapy verbatim by Fritz Perls, or Gestalt therapy by Perls, Hefferlein, and Goodman. There, it's all spelled out. And I dealt with this in English in the tape that I made about likutei moharan 52. So I spelled it out there also. I'm not going to spend a lot of time repeating that here. So the point he's making is that it's like the old Hasidic story about one Hasid says something, and another Hasid says the opposite. And the rabbi says to the first one, "You're right," and he says to the second one, "You're right." And then the third one says, another Chassid says, "But Rabbi, how can you say he's right and he's right?" And the rabbi says, "And you're right also." That's a story. What goes on here? Nachman is saying that the materialists are saying that everyday life is necessary, obligatory finding. That's what you find when you go out there. And that's true, because a person that lives that way thinks about how to pay the bills, how to raise the kids, and his whole life, a person's life is totally based on, almost totally based on practical tasks and how to accomplish them, and the end justifies the means or whatever. And that's true. To that person, that's true. The trouble is, it's in a bigger context, it's only part of the truth. In a dialectical context, it's only part of the truth. The next guy comes along and says, "No, that's not true. The truth is that the awareness moments, what you experience, when you go off in the woods and talk to God, or what you experience when you do meditation on your breathing, that's reality. That's obligatory, because those moments of awareness gradually congeal into peak experiences, enlightenment, or if in the context of Aristotle's theory of human action, that when you get in touch with all the realities of the situation, then you become more and more ready for a totally authentic action. In that sense, it all comes together. There's a certain final cause pulling the whole thing like a magnet forward. And in that sense, it's a necessary finding, that the final cause, the Word of God, the existential message of the dream, the super objective, whatever you want to call it, it really is there, it really happens. So that's also reality. There are two kinds of obligatory finding. One is if you look at things in terms of a cause and effect deductive logic, then the other is if you look at things in inductive logic. And then there's even a higher level of obligatory finding if you put the two of them together and have wean yourself from being an either-or person to seeing the balance. And then we need people like Maimonides' theory of prophecy. What's a prophet? Then what I'm saying now is a normal person. Maimonides is going to call a prophet, because a prophet, is in his mind, is a person that has a proper balance between the two sides. And this brings us back to Nachman of Breslav's essay here. Instead of calling it a prophet, he calls it an Israeli, Ish Israeli, a Jewish man. So he's taking the idea of a non-neurotic person and saying that's a Jew. And the rest of the world, the non-Jews, are crazy, neurotics, they're not as perfect as we are. And he goes on to some absurd conclusions from that. The world was created for the Jews, and the Jews are ruling the world and all that, which if you take it literally is total nonsense and dangerous stuff for a minority group to be talking about. But if you take it in the sense that he's using it, that since what he means by an Israeli, a Jew, is a person that's what Maimonides would call a prophet, a person with the proper balance between inductive, deductive thinking on the left side of the tree of life and inductive thinking on the right side of the life. So that person is an Israeli, a Jew. So in this sense, my piece, going back to my show here, how does that fit into this? I am doing the whole, in this piece, I'm just like in a Gestalt therapy session, where a person, the goal is to do the whole process, to start off with deductive, everyday thinking, where people are usually trapped in their games, their habits, their moneim, they're all the confluence, introjection, projection, retroflexion, egotism. So we can assume that Franklin also was stuck in that when he started off on this show. And so Franklin was stuck in, for example, the image of the walls as being a bourgeois mentality that wants to make a living, and is willing to compromise and sell his soul for that purpose. And except later on in the piece we discover that the two sides, the floor and the wall, discover that compromising doesn't work. It just leads to a very boring state of affairs. So then the chaos comes along and blows up that whole system, the whole deductive framework, the whole Epicurus materialistic framework is destroyed by the chaos, and the need to have a life on fire, which comes out of that, which is the moment of Tzimtzum, the moment of the death of ego, and the new energy emerging from the void and all that, and that burns up the previous system, previous what he would call the Epicurean materialist way of looking at things. So in this show, I'm showing. So first of all, that happens. That initial state of deductive logic is destroyed. And then on top of that, the way that it's destroyed is by means of the inductive logic, by means of the awareness work that I do. First of all, I'm aware of this and I'm aware of that in the painting, and then I become each of these different objects, and by becoming an object, I free it up from the context of being just a chair or just a window or just a man or just this, whatever it is. And it becomes a whole world in itself, a playground for a person's imagination and a place to project all one's needs. It creates a whole new world. So I created the world of this imaginary man, this world of imaginary woman, and their imaginary interaction. But since it's on a higher level than the original kind of boxed in deductive framework between the wall and the extreme of the wall as a totally bourgeois, and the floor as being totally, you might say, anarchist type mentality. So now we have characters which are more centered. The man and the woman, each one includes an element of the opposite. The man acknowledges that he's the man says that I'm looking for, what I need is a jack-in-the-box like me. So the image of a jack-in-the-box becomes very important in this show. What is a jack-in-the-box? The jack-in-the-box is, you think of the idea of, first of all, there's a box, an uptight person. And then there's an explosion, and this little puppet comes on his little piece of wire there, starts blowing in the wind. So blowing in the wind is the other extreme, but they're connected. They're connected because the puppet doesn't just go fly away or shatter into 100,000 pieces. No, he stays glued to his box. So we have that's another image of a synthesis here, a dialectical synthesis between the box and the puppet that wants to just fly off into the wind. So that's an example of the completed dialectic, or the dialectic on the way to being completed, because, like I said, the level of energy builds and builds and builds, and at the end, the show, the ending is not clear. I purposely not clear because I wanted to keep it in a state of totally energy of activation, you might say, from thermodynamics. I wanted to keep it at a very high level of free energy. To imply that we're looking for ultimate origins here, and not settling for any kind of rational compromise like the idea of a jack-in-the-box. Okay. One thing I could say about Nachman's essay here, this particular essay, 52, basically is saying that the bad guys are the materialists, the what do you call it, epicorsim, and the good guys are the guys that are into inductive logic and go on the trip of allowing all the awareness moments to come together into a big kind of meditative high or something, enlightenment moment, and that's the way. That's the truth. He said, "Be'emet, ha'olam umlo'o hu efshari ha'metziyut." The world is really a scattered collection of awarenesses. Ki rak Hashem yitbarach levad hu mechuyav ha'metziyut. Only God, or in other words, the force that brings all these awarenesses together in the process of teshuvah, climbing up back towards God, if you're looking at the tree of life that way. In fact, in Likutei Moharan number 1, he has a very powerful image of Ya'alat Chen. Ya'alat Chen. Ya'alat, to elevate, Chen. And Chen is a word that he put together, Chiyut and Nun. The Chiyut is the side of the awareness, and the Nun is the other thing I'm aware of, and the two come together into a moment of good contact. And so the raising up of all these moments of awareness, of good contact, whether they're in the environment or in my body or in my imagination, and they all coming together, elevating them, that's the way to get to God, according to this inductive way of thinking. But reading this essay, you can almost get the impression that he's saying that that's what the true blue Jew is, the inductive thinker. But that's, and we need to free ourselves from the monaim, from all the self-interruptions, our neurotic habits, and all that stuff, to get to that state of being a true blue Jew, by being doing lots of people to do it, in a meditative process and all that. But he corrects himself in other essays. So we don't have to say that that's the only thing he thinks. So just like me, he can't say it all in one essay, so here he's focusing on one aspect. Whereas in 51, in essay 51, I already mentioned in the previous video when I'm talking about the show, he has both sides. He's having the side that the eye of God, providence, divine providence, is the aspect of ourself that is able to look at our everyday life and without being somehow contaminated by the other side, to illuminate the other side with being free to choose and not being stuck in falsehoods and all kinds of traps that we fall into when we try to connive our way through our life. So there we have the two sides in a more balanced relationship. Okay. Maybe I'll go to this sentence here. That kind of, well, okay, hitbodedut. So the way I remember, I got to remember, I'm focusing on the show here. So this show is a hitbodedut process. Just to make that clear, it's pretty obvious. Nachman is saying, what is hitbodedut? Boded is to be alone. Hit is to make yourself alone. The hitboded, to make yourself alone. And here's what he says, summarizing the process. He says, again, I'm repeating the sense, Ki ikar habitul, shadam mevatel yeshuto v'naseh ayin. So the main aspect about bitul, canceling yourself out, negating yourself, that a person cancels out, negates his existence, and is made into nothingness. Ayin. And v'nichlal b'achdut Hashem yitbarach, and is included in the oneness of God, or the naming of God. Ein ze ela al yedei hitbodedut. The only way to get to that is not except for hitbodedut, the process of hitbodedut, making yourself alone. Hitbodedut tzarich makom uzman miyuchad, and this making yourself alone requires a place and a time that's special. Shelo yivalbalu oto hamonim, so that he won't get mixed up because of the obstructions. So I like I said before, not to get stuck in confluence, which is basically the initial state of deductive state of mind where there's no awareness at all, like an autistic child or a schizophrenic or maybe some kind of maniac, a dictator or something, where he's cut off from the world. Introduction, where you swallow whole some authority figure and identify with that person, as the Führer of your life, and think the way that person thinks without even being aware that you swallowed that, usually of some parent hole. Projection, where you project your energy, your aggressive energy out into the world and assume that people are doing something to you rather than you using your energy to do something to the world. Retroflexion, where you're I just did it right now. You start putting your nervous energy into your body and just, these people that think they're praying when they're really what they're doing is just making themselves a nervous wreck. It's possible to do the movement without making it compulsive, but that's each person needs to decide for himself whether it's compulsive or a natural awareness work. Or egoism, getting stuck in an idea of who I think I am and not allowing myself to go with the flow. All right, so those are the moneim. So now let's look at my show that way. Da ki ikar habitul shadam batel yeshut v'naseh ayin v'nichal b'achdut Hashem yitbarach ein ze ela. Okay, hitbodedut. So first of all, the moment I start saying I'm aware of it, when I start doing that process, working on the room, I almost immediately started moving away from the deductive system that a room is and moving into the scattered awarenesses and identifying with the different objects. I continue this process of making myself alone, cutting myself off from the naturalistic idea of what a room is, and you need a particular time and place. So the time at that time was 1991, and there I was in Brooklyn, that particular place that I did it. And I was alone in that room, so in a sense it wasn't midnight and the light was on, but still I was pretty close to what Nachman talks about literally here. But of course that's not the real meaning of hitbodedut. the hitbonen, there's another word in Hebrew that means and also in the first essay of Likutei Moharan, he talked about listakel, sakel, to see, not to know something, to see it. Listakel ba'rayon b'shel kol davar, and that's usually translated to find the inner idea in everything, but really the root is to see it, to pick out what catches your attention, your awareness. So that's what I was doing. I started off with looking at the picture within the system of the picture, and then I more and more freed myself from that and just looked at it from different points of view. So it takes a place and a time, a special time. So the time that I was allowing myself to enter into there was what you would call messianic time, the here and now, freeing myself up from this particular time. At that particular time in 1991, like I mentioned when I wrote the piece, I was depressed. I was in Brooklyn, and I had left Israel. I had come to Israel. I had just spent my first 9 years in Israel, and I was getting ready. I don't know, maybe a year after that I went back to Israel. I came back to Israel. So that was a time when I was groping around New York trying to find a market for my shows that I wrote about Jewish subjects, and they're getting nowhere basically, getting very depressed. So that I freed myself up from that naturalistic time, that naturalistic place, and I went into Never-Never-Land using this Gestalt process of awareness. And the Never-Never-Land of imagination and awareness, and is a special time of hitbodedut in this sense, okay? The process of doing Gestalt therapy is hitbodedut in one sense. That's it. It's basically what Nachman breslav says when he says do hitbodedut and do a lot of it in order to cancel yourself out. So in that sense, what I did was I canceled out the Franklin, who was the bourgeoisie, depressed about where to go with his life at that time, and I canceled out the other side that was my blood boiling over and just wanting to break out into God knows what I would have done if I allowed myself to just be that floor, but rather I allowed those two sides of myself, first of all, to express themselves, and then to have a conflict, and then finally, as the work went on, to negate them, to obliterate them, or to incorporate them in a higher integration that became the man and the woman, and became the final image of the piece, final moment of anamnesis, like I mentioned in the first video about this piece, the show here. So I was doing hitbodedut, exactly what he says here, okay? I was nevateling, you might say, going back to the theory, the dialectical theory, that there was originally an idea, some kind of idea that I had in my mind when I started, and that's what it was, a frozen idea of a room, a naturalistic room, okay? And that frozen idea, what he calls here the Epicurus point of view, or the materialist point of view, is already a negation of God. It's phony, because God is not a frozen system. Nachman wants to say that God is the proper balance between the awareness and the rational side, and not just the rational side. So that just starting off with a naturalistic room, a real life room, is already the negation of the true blue Jew, the Ish Israeli, the Israeli, that Nachman is implying is is a balanced state of mind. And as the piece went on, I negated, bitul, canceled out that original room. And so I did bitul, and then that led me to the two initial characters, the the wall and the floor, and later on even the air. All three of those then got canceled out by the higher integration at the end, that focused especially on the image of the jack-in-the-box. So it's a series of negations and then negations of negations, and to get to that final, what I like to think at the end was a kind of final state where all the forces were balanced. There was a high level of awareness coming in from all the different tracks that were working. At the same time, the notion of a real life woman and a real life man, I didn't surrender that completely. The characters were still there, but in the nature of, in the form of a jack-in-the-box, where they were being permeated by the final, you might say, the super-objective, which had pulled the whole thing forward, or the existential message of the dream work, or what in Gestalt therapy they called identifying with a coming solution. That holistic force was now very much permeating that man and the woman. So they're now in a very high level of activated energy. At the same time, the synthesis is still there. There's still the oneness of the final, you might say, the God or holistic element there. The identity, what we call identity side, is permeating the side of the different elements that make up a particular character. So we have identity and difference, God in the world in God, synthesis level of the dialectic. That's what was going on. I was trying. I didn't. Of course, I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. But if I look now, what I think I managed to at least hint at, to suggest, that's what it is. And it's ironic that what I consider the high point of the piece, the moment of Platonic anamnesis, when the guy says to the woman, and don't forget, what he's saying philosophically, Kabbalistically, is exactly what Nachman Breslav wants to say. And he says in the prologue to likutei, he says, the Torah will not be forgotten. And the rabbis will say, yes, it will be forgotten. So when this particular website wiped me off of the site because of this particular video that I put on there, they completely misread it. Okay, but what can you do? It's like the rabbi, it's like Shimon Bar Yochai with the other rabbis. You know, the rabbis are saying there's no way that the people are going to understand your message. And Shimon Bar Yochai says, yes, they will, because I'm going to make sure they get the message. So here Franklin Wepner is like Shimon Bar Yochai saying, I'm going to make sure you guys get the message of that show, and that it's all about what Nachman is saying. Don't forget the Torah, don't forget the truth search, don't forget the proper balance that we need in our life. We want to aim to be we want to aim to be like prophets and not like bourgeoisie. Doesn't mean we want to just be sit in the yeshiva all life. We want to find a balance between action and active and passive, and a sane life, the middle way. So that's what I'm saying, and that's what Nachman Breslav also says in the prologue. He says he's saying he symbolizes this truth search, that the relationship between, and he uses the metaphor of a brook, a nachal. I'm the nachal, in that sense that the relationship between the river, the flowing awareness, and the banks, the sided. So we have the relationship between induction and deduction projected onto a river as the water and the banks, and that's the metaphor there, or Chokhmah and Bina, or Adam and Eve, whatever metaphor you want to use. And so Nachman Breslav is saying that he is going to help make sure that this basic metaphor, this basic process of dialectical thinking will not be obliterated by the Industrial Revolution in those days. That was beginning to move in on his little world there. Basically, Marx did the same thing. He said, not going to let you forget the dialectic either. So he gave us communism, and then the fascists came along. We're not going to let you forget the dialectic either. We're going to make sure that the Fuhrer overcomes all the oppositions. And so we get identity and difference, except that the Fuhrer is going to be the identity, and everybody else is going to be obliterated. So the same... Basically, the same messianic type thinking that was contagious in those days, and maybe still is. And nachman breslav wants to make sure we don't forget the dialectic, the overall dialectical search for truth. And basically, my piece is the same thing. There's so much stuff in show business. Not just now, usually, even back for Plato, Plato's days, he saw show business as a contamination of it's got to be regulated, got to be banned, or whatever. So we have the mass media now, so show business is much more potentially lethal, and also potentially much more productive. So if people see, for example, what I'm peddling here, my work, and see how I'm using, basically doing the same thing, I'm saying, hey folks, don't forget the dialectical truth search. Watch how I do it. Look, I watch these videos I make about my dreams. Watch my shows where I'm presenting most cases. There's some kind of dialectical underlying message there. So I'm basically doing the same job, the same old story. Nothing new. Just my particular trip with my particular metaphors. In this case, the room is my latest set of metaphors to tell the same story. And if it gets boring, if you know the story already, and if it's already boring, then maybe it's enough. Maybe one of these days I'll get tired of telling the same story, and I'll stop doing it also. But at the moment, it's still interesting. Okay, so there we are. Let me look at my script here, see what I left out. All right. And just to repeat, let's see. So if you look at that initial picture of the room as a matrix, so each of the moments of awareness that at each of the time I identify with some other object, I made a hole in that matrix. I began to perforate it. That's the idea of chen for nachman breslav. The awareness is the side of vitality, chokhmah, and the object is the side of the nun. This is from his first essay. The side of the subject-object relationship. So the subject, when Schopenhauer is talking about the pure subject, he's talking about pure chokhmah, pure, the side that reaches out with pure awareness into the world, and the world the other side, the bina, or the Adam projecting an Eve out of himself, the image of Eve being born out of Adam's body. It's a very appropriate metaphor here. Oops. Let's see. So in a sense, what I'm doing is dissolving. I'm dissolving that rigid matrix of a naturalistic room there, and introducing chen, grace. And at the end of the show, you might say this show. The last image it intends to be totally chen, totally pure dialectical synthesis, pure chen, pure grace. As a matter of fact, in the first essay there, he says that if you want to get a message across to somebody and the person isn't responding, he says because you're not in your communication, you're not using enough chen, and again the same thing, the chet nun relationship. So if I'm trying to sell you my used car here about the Torah process won't be forgotten, then by focusing so much on this idea of awareness here and inductive logic and everything and showing you how I do it all over the place here, so in a sense I'm hoping that this process would, like Nachman says, would open up a place, would begin to give you a little bit of question about how much you want to stay locked in your own box there, in your own matrix, and open up a place, as the metaphor Nachman uses, to open up a place in the heart of the one, that the receiver. So he's relating to God, that we do hope to open up a place in God's heart so that he'll receive our prayers. But same thing in any relationship. If we're in touch with awareness, then our goal is to open up a space so the other person is at least willing to listen and maybe process what we have to say, and to get communication. All right. And if we, again, going back to the idea that we start off with a matrix, deductive system, and to dissolve that with awareness. So looking at the final image of the woman there, what's her state? Just taking her particular as an example. On one hand, she's obviously craving to surrender to this erotic experience. At the same time, she's hanging on to that image of herself as a responsible bourgeoisie person who needs to get up in the morning, and she goes back and forth. So the original dominant metaphor is a room with a real-life woman and a real-life man. But the final dominant metaphor is the image of a holistic process, the dialectical integration of the two sides happening here in front of our very nose. And from that point of view, the river of that's flowing towards the great ocean is the dominant metaphor. And you can think of this woman as a little clump of alchemical earth, which is dissolving in the river and being swept away. But except she's not swept away. Like I said, she's still there at the end of the show. I don't allow it to get to the final point where she just dissolves and he dissolves in this glorious euphoria about the divine truth or something like that. No, I keep the dialectical tension. And, what else we got here? Also the image of the place. Now it starts off being a room. Remember, nachman breslav said that hitbo the do, which is what I'm doing here. Here is playwriting as hitbo the do. That it requires a special place. Now what is the special place here? It starts off being a room, but what is it by the end of the show? There we can go into, and I've cited this thing many times, it's probably getting boring hearing it again, but I'll just remind you that Maimonides, in the introduction to the second part of the Guide for the Perplexed, brings in 26 principles from Aristotle, and number 13 points out what is a true motion, M-O-T-I-O-N, true motion, movement. And that is not from A to B, not linear motion, but what? Remember? Yes, circular motion in one place. So what is circular motion in one place? I remind you, is simply the dialectic moving from thesis to antithesis to synthesis and coming to back to the same place, but incorporating what was already in that one cycle, so that it's a slightly higher, more encompassing level. And that thing going on, basically it's the helix of DNA, you might say, that operates on a biological level. And here it is operating spiritually, the same helix. And so that's the place, hamakom. The encompassing dialectic, the truth search like that, where all these moments of awareness are happening at the same time, And when it's happening, you rev it up to real life speed of a gazillion cycles per second, as God, or whatever you call it, life force is constantly reviving the dead here. So in that sense, hamakom is another name for God, the place. And in the sense, in Aristotle's sense of a place, that is, to be totally involved in the reality of the situation. And that's what I did when I made that video. I didn't do it completely, of course. It was only a relatively short video. The whole thing's only 40 minutes, not like a 3-hour dream session that I do now. In fact, 35 years ago, when I first started doing this stuff in New York with avant-garde actors, I would run 6-hour dream sessions. Now there, we really got into the place. So the place being the situation that we're involved in, the here and now situation, and really getting into all the details and all the different sides, the rational side and the inductive side, and integrating all that stuff. That's really entering into the place. Because every one of those moments, a different point of view of awareness or thinking, or each of those moments of reality is another naming of God. Another point of view about God, another aspect of God's existence. Well, I can mention here, in case you haven't seen the thing I wrote about Kabod Hashem, the integrative process there of adding them all up to become the place, goes by the name in Jewish tradition is probably the Christians also, the glory of God. But in Hebrew, it's very clear where it comes from. Kavod, kovid, it means heaviness, tangibility, the tangibility of God. And the word kavod is usually translated as glory. So the tangibility of God is each of these moments of awareness that we have, and integrating them all together is if you want to think of integral calculus, even integrating them all together from 1 to infinity or whatever, is a successive approximations to the naming or encountering of God or whatever the highest energy is. So that's what in a sense, that's the process here. Again, another way of looking at the process that I did in this show. Moments of awareness, gradually approaching the idea of the name of God, hamakom. Right? So the room became the place. You might say, to say in one sentence what the show's about, it's a transformation of a room to the place. In fact, reminds me of Walter Benjamin's essay about translation, and a very important essay. And basically what he's saying is this spiral truth search, going the dialectic moving up successive levels of the spiral like that, that is translation, just from the old sense, and the Christians probably use it more, I think, the idea that angels, translating the moods that the angels move up and down the Jacob's ladder. So that translation process is a translation moving from a place, a room, a naturalistic place where a person starts his spiritual growth, and moving up, approaching by successive approximations, the naming of God, the ultimate reality, what are you going to call it? So that's what I was trying to do here. This room started off as a room and ended up being hamakom, the place. An attempt to portray the name of God in a artistic form, which puts me very much in the tradition of people like Dante or all kinds of writers that Greek tragedy, Shakespeare, all kinds of people that use this kind of a very ideal form of theater with symbolism, expressionism. That's the way I like to think of it anyway, not just as porn like some nincompoops like to think of it as porn. Well, that's their trip. What else we got? I see there's about 3 more minutes maybe on the tape. I'm not sure. Let's see if there's anything I find here. In a sense, it's also prayer. a sense, it's prayer. In the sense that I did it l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. There's no particular objective here. Just was to deal with my here and now situation. But as I did it, I discovered important needs along the way. For example, the fact that it's getting harder to find canaries. As you get to be an old man, it's harder, unless you happen to be, one of these politicians that's got a whole harem or something like that. But for a reclusive experimental theater kind of person like myself, it's not so easy to find canaries, women that can sympathize with what I'm trying to do, and can fly with me on this, can be Jack in a Box like I'm a Jack in a Box. Not easy to find them. It gets older it gets harder every year. So I discovered that kind of that ties with the idea of raging against the dying of the light. So these kind of deeper needs emerge from just doing it for l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, just starting off, let's do a trip on this picture and see where it leads. But as it turns out, it led into important existential issues. And we discovered that the initial attempt to get a rational compromise between the two sides, the wall and the floor, didn't work. It turned out to be very boring. And the alchemical air came along. That's an important idea also, that this released a lot of aggression. And then that aggression that was relieved was what in Gestalt therapy they call creative aggression, creative adjustment. In other words, the creative aggression that came out of working on the awareness and building up more and more awareness energy allowed me to metabolize, to assimilate, to chew up this frozen image that I had there at the beginning of myself as a bourgeoisie or as a totally freaked out hippie or something, and to find some kind of a centering there, to chew up the old Franklin ego image, and to find, begin to discover a new one. And that took energy. It took creative energy. It took courage, and it took energy. Strength. Which reminds me, nachman Maimonides said that a prophet needs to first of all do the dialectical process that we outlined already, and to do that requires courage and strength. If you take a look, you'll see that. Not any lazy person can be a prophet. Okay, that's it. Oh, maybe last thing I noticed here, the fact that it's a tragic form. The whole thing was a death and rebirth of ego here, so it fits into the heading of tragic drama. My show was a tragedy, a death and rebirth, but a tragedy doesn't necessarily have to have a sad ending. In this case, it had a very holistic ending where all kinds of forces came together. Okay, I think I ran out of information at the moment. I'm thinking of myself as the world's biggest blabbermouth here with my endless series of monologues here, and somehow the blabbermouth suddenly ran out of words.